All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. This is Rob here at Smirking Gun Reviews. And today we're going to be talking about something that's been built in for a while on the channel. Anybody that's a fan of my channel or a subscriber of the channel, friends, that I've made on here. Over the years, I've alluded to my past. I've brought up it. I know I've mentioned it probably a few times, but I've never gone into detail about this. And today we're talking about my life that was as a Jehovah's Witness, and how it affected my life. And the thumbnail says, how being a Jehovah's Witness ruined my life. And there's more factors to that than just being a witness. A lot of this has to do with, my family and how they were all a part of it and how that affected everything. And so we're gonna get into it. I was gonna do this video about 7 months ago, more than 7, more like closer to 8 months ago. And lo and behold, another YouTuber that I really respected, if I say his name, you guys know it. It's Chris Stuckman. He made a video. It was literally the week I was ready. I had primed and ready to talk about it. Hey, D's here in the house. What's up, D? So I saw his video pop up, and it blew my mind, first off, because I didn't know anything. I didn't know any of this about Chris Stuckman being a Jehovah's Witness. And as I watched the video, this will be posted later. No worries. As I was watching it and hearing Chris's story, I just started to feel really, really terrible, because his experience was kind of similar to mine. We have like a lot of the same interests, a lot of the same background. Like, we were both raised as Jehovah's Witnesses, and we both were really, really into film and making films and writing and all this stuff. And the longer I heard his story, the more I just felt like it was like I just couldn't talk about my own story. I was thinking about everything that he was talking about and how his life, and I don't feel bad. Like, I don't want anybody to be like, oh, I'm feeling sorry for myself or something. But he was able to overcome the problems that come with being a witness. And he was basically on the track that I wanted to be on when I was younger. When I was younger, I wanted to start writing screenplays and start being involved in film. And, I had that fantasy in my head of like just going out there and not like necessarily making it, but just doing something in the industry like that. And how my life took a nosedive, and I saw Chris's success and his overcoming the life of being in a cult. And I just felt really bad that my life didn't end up like, I was watching somebody who I respect get what they wanted. And I looked at myself internally, and I just felt like, why didn't I was mad at myself for making a lot of the choices that I made. And I know that those choices were based off of how I was raised and everything that I was taught and ingrained in my brain and brainwashed into. And it took me like all this time to finally get myself centered to actually talk about this. And while I've alluded to it many, many times, and a lot of people on the channel know about how I feel about religion, and nobody really has I've never told a lot of these things to most people about how I got to be where I am in my life. Because if you look around me, and you see this, you're like, oh, he's got a PlayStation 5 and a 70-inch television, and, he's got a 40-hour-a-week job, and how can his life doesn't seem that bad? And it's getting better. It's getting better, but I'm 46 today. I'm 46 years old today, and I'm looking back at how long it's taken me to finally start to climb out of the pit that has been my life because of how I was raised and the way that I was taught to think about the world and the people in it, and just how to behave as a human being, and how it set me back, and how I've never really reached my full potential because of it, and how my family, did their best to sabotage all that just to keep me, where they wanted me. And so just to be clear, I'm not going to be saying anybody's names from my family or any of the people in the church, because they've all got their own stuff to deal with, and how they choose to deal with this is their business. And I don't want anybody to get anybody bothering them potentially, because I know that making this video, even if I'm just Rob from Smirking Gun Reviews, I don't want anybody potentially getting harassed by the people in this cult. And I don't want them coming after them if they decide to come after me, because I could potentially be putting the livelihood, not my job, but like my life that I'm living right now, I could be putting it at risk. This could cause me to lose where I live, my home. And I've thought about that, and I still need to talk about it, because I've been living with this for too long, and I really want to kind of set the record straight about why I am the way I am. And, that's not to say that I don't like me, parts of me. But there's a lot of parts of me that I don't like, because it's still, I can still feel deep down inside my brain, there are parts that place, that those people, that cult has never left. And I fight it every single day. And other members of my family have been going through the same thing over the years. I have one of my siblings was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder because of everything that had gone on in our lives because of it. And I don't like to self-diagnose, but it's pretty clear to me that, because I've never sought out treatment. I was reaching out to medical help about 6 or 7 months ago, right around the time we were discussing making this video. And I was really happy that I made the call to the doctors. I gave them my information, and they assured me that they would get back to me. And and it was for counseling for this kind of thing, and nobody got back to me. And it was during like COVID, the height of COVID still. And I just kind of put it off, and I didn't follow up. I called them a couple of times, and they just said they'll get to you when they get to you. And life actually started feeling a little better, and I just kind of put it off, and I never called them back. And I know I still need to make those phone calls, but that's where I am now. I'm in an all right place, but I still want to talk about this, because I want everybody to really get the full scope for people that might know me and never really, I don't give a lot out to people in the world. You have to be really close to me, really close, for me to give up a lot of things that are about me. Most people that I talk to in the real world don't know me at all. They just know me as the nerdy guy at work that knows a lot about movies and comic books. And he doesn't talk much, and he doesn't look a lot of people in the eyes and things like that. So this is my way of trying to get that out. And so to talk about this, we got to go all the way back, because this, where it started before I was born. This started when my grandfather on my mother's side, he was raised by people who weren't religious. They were very much like, if you saw their home, you'd think that they were like hill people, like people who live out in the middle of nowhere and not very educated. And he found the witness religion back in the like 50s. And he got married and had my mother and her sister and her brother, and they were all being raised as Jehovah's Witnesses. And my grandmother on my mother's side, her parents were also witnesses. And so the whole family was like this really tight group of people who were all being raised in this religion. And I don't know a lot about their background, but I do know that current knowledge that was given to me about my recently passed grandfather was that he had a lot of problems that never got dealt with until near his death not too long ago. And so I don't have a lot of details about my mother's life, but I know that there's some real shady stuff that went on somewhere down the line that nobody wants to talk about. And I can't really speak on it because I don't have the facts, but there's been some real kind of things that kind of bring up a lot of history of problems in the family already. Now, in that type of time and period, in the 50s and 60s, when the nuclear family was still a thing, and, daddy knows best and mom stays in the kitchen and raises the kids, and while dad goes to work, and they were Jehovah's Witnesses. But my mother was the rebel of the family. And she was the middle child. And so she did everything that she could to push back against my grandfather and the religion. And so, she dated outside the religion. She met my biological father, and she was into drugs and alcohol. And she was ultimately kicked out of the church back in the 70s. And in 1975 is when she had me with my biological father. And she had been kicked out of the church, and it was just me and her and him. And he beat her. The earliest photo I have of myself is a picture of my mother holding me, hiding behind a dresser, as my stepfather, or my biological father, after he had just beat her, took the picture of her holding me behind a dresser. So that's kind of where I came into this world. Eventually she left him. Her family got her out and brought her back into their world and brought her back into the religion. And then my just younger sister was born. And as part of coming back, she needed to prove, that she was back into the religion. And she was damaged goods in their eyes. So, because everybody knew that she'd been doing drugs and alcohol and sleeping around, and, she had this husband who beat her, and even with that, there wasn't a lot, she could do. It's like there's not a lot of options. So she eventually met my stepfather. And my mother knowingly slept with him, which is a big no-no for the church. And their marriage was a very suspect thing, because it felt like they were basically trying to marry her off. And this guy thought he met this woman that gave him everything he wanted, and she came already with kids. So, he wanted his own kids, but he already had a pre-built-in family, and he had a job that he fell into because of his family. I had a business of their own, a family business. And so it seemed like a pretty decent family to be coming into. I didn't know any better. I was just a little, I was like 4 years old at this point. And the story that I've been told is that she didn't want to actually marry him. The day of the wedding, she was basically strong-armed into it by her father. That it's basically, it's too late now. This is happening. You've made your choices, that kind of thing. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth because I wasn't there. But this is what I was told by the people involved. So they get married, and we go to live from where we were living in Waukegan, Illinois, to Genoa, Illinois. And my mother, she didn't like being that far away from her family. But we were all there. Everybody out here that she was married into was all witnesses too. So they were all fine with that part of it. And eventually we ended up moving next door to my stepfather's family. And so we had this really close-knit, tight family here in Kingston, Illinois, where everybody was Jehovah's Witnesses. And my other family, her side of the family, was out in Waukegan, and they were all Jehovah's Witnesses too. And we'd go back and forth to see each other, and we'd always go to the Kingdom Hall out there, and they'd come out to the Kingdom Hall out here, and these were times, when you're this young, you don't know any better. You're just a kid living your life. But I also there was some dark stuff too, because I was living in fear of my stepfather. Now, because there was a lot of psychological, mental abuse going on. It got worse when my second sister, the third down the line, the youngest of our group was born. And she is his kid. Like, we're not biologically his. He adopted us by marriage, Well, not by marriage. I'm literally his kid now, I don't know how to talk about that stuff as well, but things were always different with her because she was fully his. And not to, I don't want to ever make anybody think that I didn't raise hell. I was a little hell raiser sometimes. I got into trouble, but I didn't deserve the psychological and mental abuse and sometimes physical abuse that I received. That was already messing me up pretty bad. I was always being told that I was nothing, that I'll never be anything. And my mother, one of the best things she ever did for us was she got me and my just younger sister reading at a very early age. So we were really on a fast track education-wise. She was making sure that we were smart, because my stepfather, he's got learning disabilities, and there's not a lot of brains on that side. And I hate to say it like that. But we were raised to be smarter, to try to reach our potential. And, life just kind of went on this way for a while. We did all the normal Jehovah's Witness things. We'd go with them door to door. We were young, so we didn't have to say anything. We just went with them on Sundays, and it was a real pain in the ass, right? Because nobody wants to hang out. We want to stick around, watch Saturday morning cartoons and things like that. We just want a normal life. Once we got into school, it started to really be apparent how different we were. And anybody that's been in the religion before knows what I'm talking about. Once you're old enough to start going to school, the differences in your worlds really change. You actually see how weird your life is compared to other people's. And so that, of course, means, no birthdays. We didn't understand the no birthday thing right away because we weren't around people that were celebrating birthdays. It wasn't a part of our lives. But once you got into school, and birthdays became a thing and holidays became a thing and going over to people's houses became a thing. And you couldn't go anywhere. And the people that I hung out with were my sisters. I had nobody. I had no friends in school. I had no friends outside of school. It was just me and my sisters. And while that's good, it can build a really great relationship. It doesn't do anything for it doesn't help build how you need to be built for this world, to be a part of a society, to be a part of a community, to know how to deal with people. And so I never learned how to do any of that. And so right from the beginning, I was just very awkward, because I was a pretty outgoing kid. I was, into a lot of things, and I was trying to be a happy kid. But with the way life was, I was already I read so many books back in those years. I read a lot because there was nobody else to talk to. There was nothing else to do. I played a lot outside. This is where my imagination got as big as it is. Anybody who knows me knows I've got a untapped wild imagination that's basically limitless in what I can think of, because I've spent so much time alone with my own thoughts that's just how that worked out. There were little flashes in there. I remember my first grade girlfriend. I will say her name, but not the whole name. I mean, her name was Angie. My first kiss in first grade. Nobody knew about it until she decided to dump me and go out with a guy named Chad, which is why I don't like the name Chad. So any Chads out there, sorry. But all those years, it was mostly dealing with the psychological abuse, the mental abuse. We didn't really, and there were people that we associated with, and that's another thing, is back in those days, the family, everybody would come together as witnesses and come to either my grandparents' house or the house out here in Kingston, and just be this collective group of people. And it all seemed you were so enclosed in what felt like, love and connection, and everybody, you felt this warmth, like you were part of something and as a kid, you didn't understand it. All we were told was the basics. We knew that, spoiler alert, but we were told, about there wasn't a Santa Claus a long time ago. When we were first time we brought up Christmas, they debunked everything about the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy and everything. And, being a Joe, hey, if you want to get out of spending a lot of money for holidays, just become a Jehovah's Witness. Then you won't have to buy your kids anything. I kid, of course, but holidays just never became a thing. But we were in this really close group of people. And eventually, as I was longer and I got older and I started hearing, they started giving you more and more of what the religion is. The older and more mature you got, the more that they would tell you about things. about, and the, about the 144,000 and the paradise on earth and Armageddon. And, started telling us the Bible stories, and the Bible stories are so great, and Adam and Eve and the tree and Moses and Abraham and Job. And, oh yeah, Job, what a great story that is, right? But the way that they always presented these stories was always like you'd read a fairy tale, like, Snow White and stuff. And so, they would teach us kids that stuff, so that we would be like, those stories were like our, superheroes, our Santa Claus, our Easter Bunny, our Jesus was Captain America for us, and we would go to the conventions, and if you want to feel like you're really in the warm, glowing glow of a community, go to one of those conventions. Back in the 80s, those things were huge. We would go out to Hawthorne Racetrack out in Chicago, or to the just smaller one out in Janesville, Wisconsin. And it was a time to meet all the kids that you didn't know from other congregations, and make new friends within the organization. And, we would never talk. The kids never talked about the religion when we were all meeting up together. When we'd have to sit down and listen to the stories and the talks and other things like that, most of that was just trying to get through the day so we could talk to the people that we won't see again for another 6 months to a year. We were just still trying to be kids. We were just trying to make connections and stuff. Now, things started getting real dark. Despite how close we all seemed to be, and all the trips we would take, we'd go all these just great memories. There are so many great memories that I associate with like connection with the family and the church and everybody getting together and everything when you're young, camping trips and stuff. It's hard not to like look back on some of those things and go, wow, those were some really great times. But underneath it all, there was all the other stuff that I said was going on: the psychological abuse, the mental abuse. And eventually I got old enough to where I needed to start becoming more involved in the church. And this is where things really started to get weird and change for me. And I became a part of it because I didn't know anything else. And there was a part of me back then that was like super psyched that I was part of something that the rest of the world didn't know about, right? That I'm one of the chosen ones. That someday I'm gonna live forever. I'm just, all I have to do is keep being good and just keep being a witness, and someday all the rest of you worldly motherfuckers are gonna die, and I'm gonna live forever in a paradise with the lions and the freaking sheep hanging out. All the people that died, all of them are all the good people that over the course of history are all going to be resurrected. The innocent ones, the ones that didn't know any better, that were good people that just died, all these fantasies that were being told. And it's like, what a great idea. Who wouldn't want to live in that world? I still would love to be in that world. I would love to think that the world could be this paradise, and all the bad and evil is just going to get taken away from the world. And after the dust clears, everything's going to be like a freaking Disney movie. And we're, minus the talking animals. And so it was kind of like I had this secret, like we all had this secret, like we had this in with the real God, that we were better than other people. They got you to believing that you were better than the people of the world, and that's why you didn't need them. They would always bring up the whole, pay Caesar unto Caesar, and And I would hear about the people that they considered heroes, the ones who would go to jail for not, going to war and World War II and things like that. And I really looked up to all of these people. I looked at my grandfather as like this God himself, who was like, he was the head of the church up in Waukegan. He was like a guy who would oversee other congregations, and he'd go around to other places, and I would see this guy, and and I was the apple of his eye. Like, I was his favorite. I know it. And it was just, there were so many good feelings about that, and knowing at the time, just in your heart, knowing that you're right, the rest of the world is wrong, and looking down on people. And I know that there were times where I would probably even say that, like, there's no Santa Claus and you guys are stupid, because when you're a kid, you're just a jerk sometimes. And so I was a full-on believer, full on. And I started doing little talks when I was real young, actually, too, where they give you a set of Bible scriptures, and you'd read those Bible scriptures, and then you'd formulate a story around it. And I'm like 10, 11 years old, and they're asking me to write stories based around scriptures. I remember one particular time, though, and this was kind of like the first time that I got upset with the religion. And it was because of my family's reaction to like a moment that happened in our lives. We used to have a dog named Max, and he was this Dalmatian pit bull mix, and he was the best dog in the world. And I know everybody says that about their dogs. I got the best dog in the world, but he was the best dog in the world. And one day, the day I was supposed to give a speech in front of the whole congregation, I came home from school, and old Max had just been given away because he ate too much. We couldn't afford to keep him any longer. And so while I was gone, they gave him away to another family. And I was heartbroken, in tears. I was a wreck. And I said, I can't go to church. I can't give this speech because look what happened. I'm a mess. And that's when they forced me. They forced me to go to this church, get my shit together, basically, and go in front of a bunch of people and tell them about something in the Bible that at the time I could give a crap about. I just wanted to know what happened to my dog. And everything went wrong that night. It was like everything in the whole world went wrong because I was a tiny kid. I'm short still. But they always had to put like a little stool by the podium just for me to stand on. And they would also have to take the microphone stand. So usually it's in front of you, but it's so far away from me because I was so small that they had to run it around the side to get there. And while in the middle of my speech, the entire microphone stand fell down and I started crying. And I don't even remember if I finished the speech. And that was the first time that I went, what the hell is wrong with these people? What the hell has got my parents so, what could possibly be more important than my feelings at the time? Like, why are my parents prioritizing this thing we go to over my own mental health? Well, it was also around this time that my mother and my stepdad had been having a lot of real problems. And there were moments where she would threaten to leave, to take us out of there. But she never did because she was deathly afraid of her father and what he would do. So she stayed. But she also started fooling around with other people that were not him. And rumor has it that my mom kind of became the town bicycle. Now, again, I can't really speak to that, but it was just rumors, but it was just like she was getting around town. And one day she got a job at a restaurant about 20 minutes from here. And she started working there pretty regularly, and she seemed really happy. And, and things actually seemed like were going all right. And, things were always still the same. The mental abuse never stopped. The going to church and giving speeches never stopped. Hey, my sister's here. How you doing? Then one day, we were snooping around like kids do. And we found a pack of matches. And I can't remember for sure if we found cigarettes or not. But if anybody who knows the witness thing, but I remember the matches. And in the matches was a name that was not my dad's. And we hid that. We didn't say anything about it, but I know that we were all freaked out. And then one day, we were watching one of the most, it was so weird that we were watching this movie now. And even I knew it, I understood it then, because we were watching a movie called 54 Pickup. This was also, you could tell that things were really going wrong, because my mother was renting R-rated movies, which is another huge no-no for witnesses. She was just displaying a lot of traits that were counterintuitive to being a witness. And so we were watching all sorts of terrible stuff. Well, stuff that I love now, but back then, if anybody found out that we watched Nightmare on Elm Street 2, I was still watching Disney movies. I was still picking out Old Yeller and stuff like that. But every once in a while, somebody picked the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3. Or was it 2? I don't think it matters. But we were watching 54 Pickup. And in this movie, 54 Pickup, Roy Scheider has an affair on his wife, played by Angie Dickinson. I don't know why that matters. It's just the movie nerd in me coming out. And it was the same night that my parents came out of their room and said, "Hey, kids," essentially, I am paraphrasing, but this is how it felt. This is how it felt. It was just like, "Hey, kids, do you guys know what adultery is?" I remember both my sisters, at least one of them, broke down immediately. I don't even know if they understood what the word meant. It just felt like whatever that word means, it means nothing good for us or anybody. And I remember going to the fridge and saying, "Does anybody need a Diet Coke?" Maybe it was Diet Pepsi. I can't remember. And I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything for a while. And we had it explained what was going on. That she had met somebody at the place that she works, and that our family was going to be breaking up. And we didn't understand what that meant. Now, at the time, I should mention that my mother and I had a bond that it seemed unbreakable, because I was there when she was being beaten by my biological father. And I was the oldest, and I was there when she came back to her parents. I was there when she got her own first apartment. I was there through all these other things. And I was a mama's boy a little bit. And I thought that when the family was breaking up, that we'd be going with her. But I was wrong. I was really wrong about that. And what was happening, what was decided for us, was that my little sister was going to stay here with her biological father, and me and my just younger sister were going off to live with my grandfather, who I worshiped. And at the time, and I regret it till the end of time, I thought it was the best move, because I was a kid and I was afraid of my stepfather. And I knew that my grandfather loved me more than the whole world. And like I said, I worshiped him. He was what I wanted to be. He was the head of the church. And I regret it, because I feel like when we split up our family, when we split us kids up, when we left our little sister here, it was a mistake. And at the time, we were told there was no choice, that they couldn't. It was there were so many different reasons given. Some sounded financial. Some sounded like they couldn't handle all the things. I don't know. And again, I can't speak for all the reasons why these decisions were made, because I just never got told them. A lot of things never got explained to us back then. And so we went off to live with our grandparents, me and my just younger sister, and we left our little sister here. And that's when things changed again. And I know some of you might be going, what does this have to do with Jehovah's Witnesses? Because, well, we were, and we were really close, and I was into it heavy. And I thought, like I said, that I was better than the rest of the world, and I had this. It doesn't matter. Just keep surviving this, and there's that reward at the end. And my grandfather's the head of the church. Who better to live with? But immediately, once we arrived there, it was like a whole different story. Everything that I knew up until that moment flipped on itself. Because the real person that my grandfather was finally showed himself. Now, he claims I'm sure that he thought he loved us. And maybe in his way that he did. But he made it very clear from the beginning that things weren't going to be like they were before. And I went from being the apple of my grandfather's eye to a burden that was thrust upon these people that were in their 50s, early 60s, getting up there. They had already raised their kids, and now they're raising their daughters' kids. And I think the only reason that we were sent there, one of the major reasons I should say we were sent there, was to make sure that we stayed in the church. I think they wanted to control us to be, if my mother was going to leave the church, they weren't going to lose the kids to my mother not wanting to be in it anymore, because she was kicked out now. This is the second time she's been kicked out. So she went off to live the life that she always wanted, because my mother, it turns out, was a very selfish person. Now, she was going through things. She was trying to escape her own problems that she had. She was very unhappy, and I understand that. My problem is that when you have children, you don't get to be that selfish. So she abandoned us to go live her fantasy life that she always wanted, and she disappeared from our lives for a while. And my grandfather began his rule of my life. And and this living where we lived before, we went to church. We got into the church, but we weren't in the church. It wasn't as serious as when it became when we got sent to live with our grandparents. They were one of them is still, are super into the Jehovah's Witnesses. This is hardcore old school religion types. And so there was no negotiating things, and there was a fast track, and they were putting me up there they were I'm trying to the right phrase that they do, grooming. They were grooming me and my sister. Now, I do realize that women don't play a very heavy role they don't play a role in the hierarchy of witnesses, something that I actually didn't even realize. I didn't even think about it because they were always there. Women were always there. They were there going door to door with us. They were there at the church, and they were there singing the songs, and they were answering questions in the watchtower every Sunday. I never questioned the whole who's in charge of this thing being only men, literally until just recently, because I had tried to distance my brain from a lot of this stuff. But they were grooming both of us, and we were there and learning and reading all of the Bible backwards and forwards and getting further and further into it, and I just kept getting more and more disconnected to the real world. Growing up, I was always picked on and bullied, so I had no friends in school that weren't nerds like me. When I say we don't get to hang out with anybody, we could hang out with people while we were in school, but not outside of school. Not really. Not once we got to a certain age. That was basically a no-no. And when we did hang out with anybody, it was before Grandpa got home. We might hang out with the nester, the kid next door. Well, because I'd never dealt with the divorce, I started shoplifting hard. I started shoplifting real hard. I was ripping off the local Kmart on a daily basis. I was sneaking out. I had a perfect way of stealing from there, and I was looking for attention. I was looking for someone to notice me because I hadn't dealt with the divorce. Because I don't know how, this is something that I don't really talk about with my sisters, is how did you all really deal with it? Because that was how I dealt with it. I eventually got caught. I broke down in tears, and I was punished by going to the Kmart and scrubbing their front doors with a toothbrush for 12 hours. But the church stuff got more and more intense. The other thing that happened was when the divorce happened and we split up the family, that closeness that we all had was gone. We were disconnected. Everything that was now so much different. We didn't really come out here very often. The groups, my mother had put a stain on everything. And when somebody does something like that, like what my mom did, it doesn't just hurt their reputation. It hurts your reputation. And one time when we came back here to visit, we went to the church, and we were now not who we were. We were the kids of an adulterer. And the people in the congregation, the children in the congregation, turned on us. And I mean, it was ugly. There was this situation that we became embroiled with that just still to this day blows my mind. because we just wanted to get out of there. We could tell that nobody wanted us there. And one of the kids from that congregation wrote a note, put it in some lady's purse, and wrote it that it was that it was me that did this. They also followed me out to the car of when the meeting was over, I went out to the car, and I remember my little sister was with me, and they followed me out to the car to harass me. These are witness kids bullying another witness kid because their mother was an adulterer. It got so bad that people finally had to come out and disperse it. Oh yeah, JB, it sure did. But when we got home, we got a phone call that this note that was found in some lady's purse, that somebody else just wanted us in trouble, wanted me in trouble for some reason. And it just broke my heart again, because I was like, these people were people I hung out with every day. These are the people that are supposed to support you when things go wrong. You know, we're all supposed to be this one big group, and my mother's crimes shouldn't be my crimes against the religion, shouldn't be my crimes too, but apparently they were. And I don't remember if I ever went back to that church, because I remember talking to a guy, and I'm not going to say his name, but he was a halfway decent guy, at least at the time, who was on my side. And I was like, look, I don't know what they're talking about. I would never do this. My mother, I don't know what they have against me, why they would do this to me. But these kids that I had spent my, young years with, suddenly I was their enemy. And so I couldn't go home again. It felt like I was losing one of my homes. It was that church. A whole group of people just deciding that you're as guilty as your mother. To this day, and it's been a few years, but about 4 or 5 years ago, some of them came to my job and still thought that the reason I never came back was because of what happened when I was a kid. That's how long they remembered it. How badly I was treated back then. They knew what they did. And they still try to say, hey, it's not like that anymore. And I'm like, man, if you really think that that's the reason why I don't come back, you're out of your mind. But in the new church that I was at with my grandfather, who was, if you guys don't understand the hierarchy of the Jehovah's Witnesses, I'll try to give you what it was like then. Because I've heard a lot of stories from people of past 20 so years of being a witness. And some of it's the same and some of it's very different. But there was these people called overseers. And they would go around they'd be like the head kind of guys of like a whole big area. And they would go around to all the churches, like traveling around, giving talks. And then you had I think it was presiding overseer. That was my grandfather. And he was like in charge of maintaining like a certain section of the churches. And he would go around to those churches occasionally, like in a circuit. Or maybe that's what it was, a circuit overseer. No, circuit overseers were something else. And if you see me looking over there occasionally, it's because I have somebody in the room here giving me moral support. I don't know if they want me to say who they are, so I won't. So he would go around and he would give his speeches to all the different churches, and we would go around with him. And I was, people started to know who I was from this. And it was weird. But my grandfather became this very stern disciplinarian. He hated just about everything that I was. I remember in the first year or two that we were there, two things happened that really stick out in my mind. One was I brought home a copy of Douglas Adams's So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. I was 12 years old and I'm reading Douglas Adams. Nobody praised me for the ability to read at that level at 12. He saw that and he looked through the book and he started screaming at me, telling me that he's going to throw me out of the house at 12 years old for bringing in some devil book to his house. He literally threatened to kick me out of the house and send me back to live with my stepdad because he knew I was afraid of him because of the book. And I'm in tears, blubbering, trying to explain, please don't. Here's the thing, I hadn't even gotten around to reading the book yet. He had gone through my things probably because I hadn't been, I had been shoplifting or whatever, but he liked to go through my things. He liked to search the place. The other time was, and of course, obviously, he didn't throw me out. He just wanted me to think I was. He wanted me to learn some kind of twisted fucking lesson. We lived really close to Six Flags Great America. And we got season passes because we were like literally 5 minutes away. And it was like a dream come true. Being able to go to an amusement park during the summertime every single day, knowing we did, and it pays for itself in like 2 visits. But the day we went and got them, I remember I was so proud because I had a wallet. I had my very first wallet. It was orange with Velcro. And I had my season pass in the wallet, and we got on the bird cages. If you guys don't know what those are, those huge rotating bird cages that you just sit and you look around. Well, we got off the bird cages. We ended up going home because it was the end of the night. When I got home, I realized I did not have my season pass with me. I had lost it at Great America. And he flew off in this rage about how much money he spent on these things, how I don't understand things. I'm 12, by the way. Again, I told him all we got to do is go back to the park and look for it. I think I probably left it on the bird cages. We did. We went back. We found it. It was in the bird cages. They were holding it for us. Problem solved, right? Wrong. So even though the problem was solved and we got the season pass, right, and I learned my lesson to make sure I don't lose the season pass, he told me that he was going to cut the season pass in half. Or he could hit me on the ass with this metal spatula. I used to get, and back in the day, a lot of us used to get spanked. I think a lot of us have stories about the wooden spoon, and look, they're not fun stories to tell, like that, like we dwell upon. We got disciplined. Spankings were sometimes necessary. The wooden spoon would come out when we were really bad. I don't know. I can't speak to everybody else's history of discipline, but that was our discipline. Most of the time we get spanked with open hand, pop, 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 whatever. But I was beat with a wooden spoon a lot. And he told me that I would have to take it. And this metal thing was fucking huge. And I was like, well, I'm not going to let you cut this in half. So you go ahead and you spank me if you have to spank me. But this is the last time. And he wailed on me this head of the church, this presiding overseer, this man of God, this man who I worshiped and looked up to my entire life. It seemed like he was getting off on mentally torturing me over a few bucks that he spent to give us joy, to take us to a place where we would have fun. And now I'm getting smacked on the ass with a metal, and it hurt like a bitch. And I remember I did have one thing that I had learned when you get spanked is that you got to tighten up your ass. You flex your ass muscles, kids. Then it hurts a little bit less. And I'm sorry, I'm sorry, we might have there's a little bit of a distraction here. Sorry. Anyway, so he never spanked me again. That was the first thing that ended. I said, all right, we have a okay, sorry. If you're wondering why all the weird subterfuge, it's because I'm doing this unbeknownst to the person who would have a problem with me talking about this. He would have a huge problem with me talking about this. And so we're kind of having to keep track of his whereabouts. So anyway, that was how I felt about that, was that this person that I respected only didn't care about me like I thought he did. And he only cared about the religion. And so I realized that I don't like this person anymore. And I'm trapped. I'm trapped living with this person who is not who I thought he was. And it made me wonder, if he did this to me, how many of his kids had he done this kind of thing to? Because as I know now, he was undiagnosed with his own problems. Now mix that with the power that he had in the church, and he was a really scary guy. No, I'm not perfect. I know that I did kid things. I did things to rebel, but I didn't deserve this kind of treatment. And it just kept getting worse. No, he never hit me, but the psychological abuse just kept continuing. It was like I switched from one abuser to the next. And it felt like my whole life I was just being around abusers, whether it was my biological father beating my mother, whether it was getting psychologically tortured by my stepfather, and then having the same thing happen to me with my grandfather. And these are all people of, other than my biological father, these are all religious people. These were all people that were connected to the church, and really deep into it. And it seemed like no matter where I went, I was trapped with these kind of people. And then I also found out, and this is going to be some kind of really kind of treading lightly, but some stuff happened with my just younger sister. And I hear a lot of stories these days about sexual abuse in the Jehovah's Witness community. And to be honest with you, because I kind of closed myself off from this, like actually thinking about the church, like literally taking the time to think about how they do things. I hadn't thought about it in a really long time, and I'm so angry at myself because something happened to my sister. Someone in our family did something to my sister. Not my littlest sister, but my just younger sister. This person is still around today. Nothing ever happened to do anything about it. It was pushed away like it never happened. And then it basically became like it never happened, to the point where I forgot. I myself forgot about it. And it's one of those things that I will have a very hard time forgiving myself for. I don't know if I want to be forgiven for it. Because I used to hang out with this person. I shared meals with this person. I hung out with them. I went to movies with them. I talked about all the nerdy stuff that I'm into and all that stuff. And this whole time I was forgetting that I'm sitting in the room with a fucking pedophile. He lived in the same house as me for years. And I hadn't remembered it. And my sister, she's been living with this her whole life. Nothing had been done about it. And I wasn't there for her when I needed to be there for her, because I was too young to know what the hell was going on. And I allowed myself to forget. I recently said that if this person ever tries to enter our lives again, he will regret it. If I ever see this person again, I will say things that will probably get me into a lot of trouble. But it's the only thing I can do. This person even reached out to me recently. It's like, hey, how's it going? And I was like, I didn't know what to do. I didn't answer them. I blocked them on social media. Because as far as they know, we're buddies. We had fantasy fucking football together. And he was a part of the religion. And he got away with it because they made it go away. And if I think that I'd gone through things, I have no idea how my sister kept going. She buried when we were in high school and in school in general, she buried herself in books and in education, and it was always better at school than me because I was more of the street smarts and she had the book smarts. But the thing is, it turned out I didn't have any street smarts. I just had smarts. I just didn't know what kind of smarts they were. I was the clever one. I was the clever, funny one. She was the smart one. And I remember getting a lot of pressure about where I was going to be in the church, because as the older I got, the more my family was putting pressure on what our future was going to be. And when I was old enough to get a job, I was 16 years old and I was getting charged rent to live in my house by the good man of the church. And I was giving more and more talks. But I was still more and more alienated, and I didn't know anything about the world. And I was so confused all the time because I had all these thoughts about the truth, that they like to say that the religion is the truth. So I had all these conflicting ideas in my head of how this religion is and what my life is like. And like, if this is what you have to put up with to get your eternal reward, is to put up with years and years of verbal and mental abuse, and sometimes physical. And I didn't know how to deal with any kind of social situations. I didn't know how to deal with any regular people. I mean, regular ass nerds get bullied all the time. I was like on a whole other level because I was a witness nerd. And so I got a special kind of bullied. And all I wanted to do was just be like everybody else. Except I also wanted to live forever and hang out with the animals like the church tells me to. And so I was living this like I had this like dual mentality going, where I was doing what the church wanted me to do, and I was trying to figure out how to live in the world. This is where I learned how to lie. This is the part of my life that started the lies, where I learned how to be a really good liar. It was like breathing after a while. I was telling everybody what they wanted to hear all the time. And because of my placement and who I was living with, a lot of people never questioned what I said. And I just got to be better and better and better at hiding and subterfuge. Where it was just like, I didn't even know where the lies ended and the truth began. Because I was slowly but surely realizing that I couldn't live like this. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go, because my sister, she seemed like she was really into it. My just younger sister. I really didn't know what was going on with my littlest sister. It turns out that my grandfather was bullying her. So bad that on one visit, they ended up leaving early on a visit, and we didn't see her very often as it is. And she didn't come back, and she really never came back. So, and I'm sorry, guys. Sometimes I didn't realize I was going to need a second here, because it's been a lot. So it was being put on me to figure out what I was going to do with my life, because they wanted me to be big moving up in the church. And what was funny is that I wasn't popular in the church either. I was the oldest boy there. Everybody was younger than me. I had an attitude problem because I was bullied by people, and I could see that if everybody thinks that people in the witness religion are all fun and happy, shiny people, and they all get along and they sing fucking kumbaya, that is not true. It is just as cliquey as anywhere else. It is just as grouped up. The rich people hang with the rich people. The poor people hang with the poor people. The kids are just as awful as regular kids. So, like, if you think that, the nerds were hanging out with the popular kids in the church, that's not true. They would make you, so I didn't have a community outside of the church, and I barely had one inside of the church. And I did develop an attitude problem about it. They were the popular kids would always be like, "What's wrong with your brother?" to my younger sister, because she was popular. He's got an attitude problem. And the thing was, when you're that age, you don't even really, you're like, that's right, I got an attitude problem. What are you going to do about it? The thing was, one of the things is that the parents never really noticed this stuff. They all think that we're all getting along super fine and dandy, but underneath it all, it's just as cliquey as any high school group. So it's like they were thinking they were protecting us from the world and the kids of the world, when really we were just as worldly as anybody else. We just weren't doing the things that the kids out there were doing in the rest of the world, underage drinking and, underage sex and doing, smoking pot. We weren't doing those things, but we were treating each other like terribly and creating just as many divisions as you would in high school. And so I never felt like I had a place anywhere. And I just kept regressing. And I never seemed to ever get like mentally older, because I didn't know where I placed. I started reading comics when I was freshman in high school. Still read comic books today. I started diving into all this stuff because it was better than my reality. I got obsessed with stories because all these other stories were better than the one I was living. I remember the first time my grandfather found my comic book collection, because I was using the money that I was making at my job to buy comics, because that's what kids do. And when he was done taking his cut of my paycheck, I would buy comic books. And when he found them, he told me that I was reading about devils, that this is all devil's work. This is demonism. You're bringing demonism into my house. And so he would throw them away. I eventually got him to let the books be sent up to my mother's house up in Wisconsin, where she had been living with her third husband. Now you might be wondering, like, where was she during all this, right? She kind of disappeared from the story. That's because she stopped being a mother. About a year after the divorce, and about a year after she abandoned us, she just showed up kind of out of nowhere. Just walked up to the house like nothing had ever happened that we were living at the time. I remember being so terrified of my own mother, because she left us. And I learned really quickly that she, even as kids, we wanted to believe that she was our mother again, that she was back, she was there, she still loved us. But really what she'd become was just an acquaintance. She was always a mother when we needed a friend, and a friend when we needed a mother. Whenever it came to anything hard, she'd bail. But she felt like she had the right to step in on stupid things that didn't matter. And that went on for years. Years and years. Because she finally had gotten away. This was her escape from all of it. She didn't have to be around her dad anymore that was controlling her life. She didn't have to be around my stepdad, she was married to and wasn't happy. She finally and she didn't have to be around us, because all of us were never really planned. And so she got to live the life that she wanted. She got to live her selfish life. She still is living her selfish life. She's never taken any kind of responsibility for how any of us have turned out. Not to say that we're terrible people or anything, just terrible things have happened to us. And so, yeah, she would just show up periodically. And when I was a freshman in high school, this was when I finally started really getting into what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a writer. I had started writing before the divorce had happened, and I would write like 16-page books based on things, kind of like things that I had seen or watched or read. I remember writing a 16-page book that was like similar to the movie Critters, if anybody remembers that. I remember drawing. I was also really into drawing. And me and this guy named Jason would do like caricatures that were mashed up versions of famous people to inanimate objects. I remember we had a Rick Springfield character who was a toilet. And so I was getting really creative and getting really into all this stuff, you know, and I was kind of encouraged a little bit by my mother, but nobody else had any use for what I was doing. But then the divorce happened and things just went sideways for a while. I stopped writing for a really long time. And then once I discovered comic books, the second half of my freshman year, I proceeded to write a 314-page X-Men book. My English teacher freshman year let me out of homework to work on this book. And I know deep down in my heart that it wasn't good. It wasn't fundamentally anything anybody'd really want to read, but it was like a first attempt from a 14-year-old kid to write a novel in her classroom, and she encouraged it. And I did it all under the sly, because if my grandfather had found out that I was writing a book about the X-Men, he'd burn it, he'd throw it away. And she read it when it was done. The teacher read it, and she was all happy about it. And I know that she was shining me on. I mean, she was just impressed that one of her students wrote a book, whether or not it was perfect or not. I gave that book to my mother to read. Never saw it again. She would tell me for a little while that it was in storage and that it was in some box somewhere that she just didn't have the time to go and get. I don't know what happened to it. I don't know why she told me that she lost, that it was somewhere she couldn't get at it. I don't know if it was because she was mad that her own life didn't turn out the way she wanted it to, and was pissed that one of her kids was writing novels at 14 years old. Again, I can't speak for it, but it just felt like those kind of things tracked, that she just got rid of it because whatever. That damaged me a lot. That damaged my confidence a lot. It was like, it just felt like another betrayal. And so I didn't write anymore the rest of my high school career. I started writing again a little bit later, after high school. I feel like maybe I need to start getting more to my point here, but I'm a storyteller. I need to give the full account of what happened, how everything happened. So I started realizing that I didn't want to live this life, whether I believed it or not. And I did. I still believed. I still went to all the meetings. I went door to door all the time. I gave speeches and I was good at it because I was good at lying. I would find a story, I would get the scriptures, and I'd come up with some cockamamie thing that they wanted to hear. And I was good at it. I was really good at it. I would get complimented all the time about how great my stories were, how great my speeches were, how you made it so much, so personal. And, I'm like 15, 16 years old. And I mean, I remember, like we would all sing our hearts out, and I'm sitting there singing and all I'm thinking about is how do I get out of here? Because I didn't feel like I had any options. Because when you're in the witnesses, they want you to find a trade. They don't want you to find a job, like any old job. They want you to do something that's more trade related. It started making sense why my grandfather was like a printer all his life. Why a lot of them are in jobs like construction and plumbing and things like that. It's all things that apparently were meant to be useful when the end of the world came, that we would need people to do plumbing, build houses, because somebody would have to rebuild everything after God burned everything to the ground. Well, I was just working at Jewel, man. Like, and I was trying to figure out how to get out. And I had secretly started like talking to some friends, one friend in particular. And then a couple of the guys that I worked with, I was also working at Subway. I had 2 jobs at one point just because my grandfather's cut of the money that he was taking every week out of my paycheck was becoming harder and harder to live with. So I was working at Jewel and Subway at the same time. And when I was working at Subway, I met somebody who kind of started to give me the courage to leave, to figure out, to actually give me the nudge, start seeing what the world could really be like. And this is going to be really weird bringing this up. This is like a twist out of nowhere, some weird left turn. But I used to work with a guy from a band that you might know at Subway. Zion, Illinois, ring any bells to anybody? I used to work with the lead singer of Local H at Subway in Zion, Illinois. And when people like Scott Lucas would find out that when people in general would find out you're a witness, they would always have their questions and curiosities. You'd be this oddity in the room. Are Jehovah's Witness teens expected to go on missions? No, I think I don't know what it's like now, but back then, I think that was something that you would have to do. Like that would be something a personal choice, really. I think they loved it when somebody would say, hey, but that's not really why I'm here. I'm not here to talk about that, unfortunately. So this guy got really curious about what my life was like, and he kind of helped give me the nudge I needed to start doing things on my own and inching my way out the door. And I would hang out with him occasionally. We'd go to the movies and everything. And it was just nice seeing like somebody out there that in the world that was like cool, but also like showing me like, this is what's out there. These are people, and you can have friends, and you can go to parties, and you can, you don't have to do what, if you're not happy, don't do what you're doing. There was also another guy named Keith who was very sympathetic to my situation. And then I met a girl, and that was pretty much the linchpin kind of thing. I started sneaking around And since I was so good at lying, I would always say, no, I'm going over to so-and-so's house to stay. I would literally be going, like, taking trains down to where she lived and saying I was at friend's house. Right around this time, they had finally gotten to the point where they were like, are you going to get baptized or what? Because if it doesn't seem like your heart's in this anymore. And I realized, oh shit, the walls are closing in on me. They're starting to figure out that I'm not in this anymore. Here's the thing. I still believed in most of the stuff. I just wanted to live a life on top of it. I hadn't even gotten to the point where I didn't believe anymore. I saw some weird things, some things that, like made me question certain things, but still that idea of, because I'd been ingrained to they would tell me, don't worry about getting your driver's license because Armageddon's coming before you're 16. Don't worry about having to register to vote. Armageddon's going to come before you're 18. Don't worry about having to vote for anybody or anything like that because Armageddon's going to be here before you turn 21. So I didn't really see the point in much of a future. I was just living my life, counting the days until Armageddon would come. And I thought that if I just towed the line long enough, that I'd be, that all this would go away. And I just believed all that. And so I was like, well, what's the harm if I get a girlfriend? What's the harm if I hang out with this person that's not? I realized though at that point that I couldn't have it both ways. So I had to, since I got so afraid of what would my life be like if I got thrown out, that I reinvested in the church. And I started studying like crazy. It was like my last year of high school, where I had never been on honor roll before. But my senior year, I got like straight A's practically the whole time. Like I reinvested in school because I wanted to win a car. There was a contest that if you had perfect attendance, your senior year, you'd be in a contest for a car. And that year, I studied like hell. I kind of compare it to that, where I just got reinvested for a while. And I read all the stuff and I went to all the things and I went to all the meetings and I had all these personal meetings and people would come over to interview me and talk to me about what I want to do. And eventually, because you had to go through all these like trials of people coming over and interviewing you basically for baptism into the church. And eventually I had said all the right things and done all the right things and convinced all the right people. And my sister, I believe, had already gotten baptized. She was a real go-getter in this department. She was always more ahead of things. And I think that was why they started coming down on me, was that she had pulled ahead. And since women don't really have a place in the hierarchy, there was only so far she was going to go. But me, on the other hand, apparently, guys rule and women drool in the Jehovah's Witness hierarchy. I was valuable to them. I was a commodity. So eventually I got baptized. I believe it was like 6 months later that I left. I had been able to shine them on long enough to get baptized. And I thought that I knew, when you're that young, you think you know what you're doing. You think you know life. You think you know the world. You think like you can just do whatever. And I had no idea how much damage that the church had done to my brain, to how I thought about things, to how I thought about morality and just and how to handle people. I didn't know any of it. I thought I did. So I had finally had enough. I had been out of high school for about a year, literally literally over a year. And the thumbnail that you see of this, the Wake magazine, that was basically the month before I left the church. That was the magazine, the Awake magazine, from the month before I left the church. I would have left my whole life behind. My friend Keith had tickets to Lollapalooza. And it was the same weekend that my grandfather was going on this this like long little trip to Quetico, Canada. And this is when I saw my moment. I knew that if I didn't leave now, if I didn't figure out how to leave while he was gone on a trip, then I would never, ever leave. I would be stuck there forever. At the time, I did not tell my sister that I had these plans. I regret this because I didn't trust her. The church had taught me not to trust my sister because I thought that she was so into it that she would tell on me that I was going to be leaving. So I left her out of the whole thing because I couldn't even trust my own sister anymore. So, you know, the old story, somebody goes out for a pack of cigarettes and never comes home. Well, mine's a little cooler than that. I went to Lollapalooza and never came home. I went to that concert with my friend Keith, and I never came back. That's not to say that I like vanished. I still had my jobs, and I was living with Keith and his family. They were sympathetic to my situation, but I needed to get out of this religion that was wrong in so many ways. I remember my grandfather. There's only a few times that I'd seen my grandfather since before he died. The first of, I believe, 4 times before he died was when he came into my job at Subway after I had left. And I had been by the house to get my rest of my things, and he hadn't been there at the time. I had made sure that he wasn't when I did. He came by and he's like, I thought he was going to try to talk me into coming back home. Or that he was maybe worried about me. Like literally, like, I'm worried about you. I'm scared for you. Are you okay? How are you living? You know, I love you. The only thing he was concerned about was whether or not I would still be going to the church. He didn't ask me about anything like that might have affected me. And it's scarily, I'm guessing in hindsight, I'm kind of glad he didn't. But he couldn't be bothered to ask how I was doing or how I was living. He just wanted me back to the church because the church only cares about you as a commodity. They only want you around because if you don't, without members, they die. So that was one of the last times I ever saw him, because I totally said, "Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna be. Don't worry, I'm going back. I have no intention of not going to the church." I never stepped foot in one of those places ever again, except for one time. Nope. Yeah, one time after that. And that was when my great-grandfather died. And I came back for the funeral. And that was a whole other shit show. And I'll segue just into that for a second. When you go to a witness funeral, this man that died, my great-grandfather, he was a man that I respected until the day he died. After the day he died, he's the only person I still respect from my family, because while he might have been a witness, once he reached a certain age, he started just kind of talking truth all the time, like real truth. Like he just was happy he was alive, happy he was around his family. He didn't care about all the other stuff. He wasn't sitting there like. And when I went to his funeral, I was expecting somebody to actually talk about this good man, this actual good man. Like, you see I've been to other funerals, like you see funerals. I see funerals on TV and I'm like, wow, they talk about the person and how great they were and how much impact they had on the world and the people in it. And all they talked about the entire time was the church. They almost brought up nothing about him. It got to be so bad where I had to be kind of almost stopped from getting up and going to the mic and being like, this is all bullshit. So that's a witness funeral. So I left the church and I was living with this guy, Keith's family, for a while. And this is when it set in me, kind of like what Chris Stuckman said in his video, that you just never realize how little you are prepared for living in the real world and how mentally stunted you can be. I felt like I had no idea what anything was, how to do anything other than what I knew. I made a lot of mistakes over the course of the last 20 or so years. Made a lot of them right away. And I didn't know how to behave. I realized that I was like a 16-year-old mind about a lot of things, and I never, ever really got over that. I felt stuck in time because I didn't know how to do anything that regular people did. I didn't know how to think like an adult because nobody had prepared me for it. There was no preparation for being out in the real world because there was no real world when you're in the witnesses. There's just their world. And when they keep you in that box for that long, you feel like everything's normal. But as soon as you step out of that box, you realize just how abnormal your life was. And it was one of the, it was so scary that I immediately failed at everything. It got so bad that even the family that took me in had to kick me out because I didn't know what I was doing, and I had no future. I didn't have any prospects. I literally they didn't know what else to do, and I apologized to them. They'll never watch this, but to the Miller family, they got me out, but I didn't handle things well because I didn't know how to do real world stuff. I was like still thinking like a witness in so many ways. And that lasted for a really, really, really long time, that mentality. I ended up living in a hotel. And this was just basically the first of all the terrible people that took advantage of me started there. It got so bad. I was working I had lost all my jobs because I just didn't know how to handle anything outside of, I wasn't in school. I had nothing to tether me, and it just didn't, I couldn't make any connections to anyone, and I lost everything, and I was living in this hotel room. And one day when I was at work, I was working at this little tiny grocery store that's like a mom and pop grocery store, part-time. It was like a block from the hotel. And my hotel room had been robbed Everything of mine was gone. Anything of value that I had was gone. I had nothing. I had nowhere to go because I had no idea what I was doing. Because I had no mental preparation for any of this. I ran off half-cocked because I just needed to get out. I didn't understand really why I needed to get out at the time. I just knew that I didn't want to lie anymore. I didn't like living a double life. I was 19 when I got out. Well, my mother heard about what hadn't happened, and I can't remember how. But I thought again, she said, you know what? Why don't you come and live with us? And again, I thought, oh my God, I'm being rescued. I'm getting a lifeline from the person that should have been taking care of me in the first place. But she had lived too long without worrying about having to have kids. And now she has a grown-up kid living in her house. She didn't know how to raise her own, she didn't know how to raise us when we were 12. She didn't know how to help us. She didn't know how to help me now because I needed a lot of help. I didn't know what I was doing. And she was so into her own thing that she couldn't be, I was always upsetting her because it's like so weird because she went through the same thing, yet she was never empathetic about my situation, that I'm her. Yet she lacked the skills to help me. And I was being a 19, 20-year-old and trying to live, but I still had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to handle being around regular people. Still don't most of the time. I've never fully been able to explain myself to the world at large. Because I've always felt like one of the reasons why I like Captain America is, and I didn't understand it when I was a kid, but I understood it later, was that he's a man out of time. He's a guy who doesn't fit in. He fit in one part of his life. When he had the war, he fit in there. And I felt like when I was a witness, I fit it, like I had that life. I had something that made sense. And then when I left, I didn't have anybody anymore. And I was like, the world was one life. The other life was this. I felt like I was older, but I felt like I was like 12 in some aspects. So I was like too old for some things, too young. I didn't fit in anywhere in any kind of place. I was so lonely. And eventually my mom needed me to get a place, and I got a place and I got a car, but I didn't know how to, like, moving out on my own. I became a waiter. I'd been doing customer service most of my life. So, I was working at Jewel. I was working at Subway. I was working at Blockbuster. That's all I knew. College was never on the table, by the way. I should bring that up. Nobody wanted, Jehovah's Witness kids didn't go to college. That was never allowed. Now, I've heard that has changed somewhat over the last 30 years. But that was never on the table. So film school, none of that kind of stuff. If they would have let me go to college, it would have been a trade school. So I never got a chance to learn how to do any of the things that might have helped me in my life. So I just kept screwing up. I didn't know how to save money. I never had money. I never had anybody tell me how to do any of these things, how to take care of myself, how to budget. And I'm thinking, imagine like a 12-year-old who just lives on his own and makes his own money. What do you think they're going to do? Eventually, I lost my apartment because I was spending money on things that I didn't need to spend money on. And I just turned 21 and I had, discovered booze, which was the next big horrible thing. Loneliness, depression, and alcohol. So I lost my first place and I ended up living basically on the street. There was two guys that I worked with that allowed me to stay there for a week. I was couch jumping for a while. I ended up living in a van, not down by the river. I was living in a van that was owned by a guy who ran a local pool hall that I would frequent. And he said I could live there because I could stay there as long as I needed to get on my feet. It was next to a Big and Tall store, and that guy just let him park his van there because they were friends. This is where I met another guy, and he I can only assume he still is, a sociopath. He thought he loved the relationship, the friendship, if you want to call it, that we developed. He's the guy, I'm the kid who lives in a van, and this guy is my friend. And eventually, when the van thing fell apart, because I was living in a van, how do you think that's going to go? This guy, he knew how desperate I was. He knew I was so desperate to not sleep on the streets that he convinced me that the only place I could sleep was the trunk of his car. And so, because he told me that his parents didn't want him having anybody over. So I had to be real quiet and sleep in the trunk of his car, and especially be really quiet when they would wake up in the morning and go to work. Don't make any noise, or that if they hear you in the trunk, it's all over. I found out later that they would have been perfectly fine with me staying in the house. Not long, but there was no reason for me to stay in the trunk of the vehicle. I ended up moving in with some more people that were terrible because I didn't know where else to go. I knew these people at another job I had. I ended up sleeping in a crawl space for over a year because I didn't know how to live. And these people, one of the people that lived there was literally carried out by the paramedics because he had gone insane. There were 3 people living there, and he was living in a crawl space too, while the one guy lived in the main normal area. One night, we came home and the guy was stabbing himself in the hand, and we had to call the ambulance to come and take him away. And so I lived there until the guy who lived in the main room, he decided to run away with those people who sell magazines. They get the group of kids to go knocking on doors and sell magazine subscriptions. Well, he said, I'm going to go do this for 6 months here. The whole place is yours. You don't have to sleep in there, but you got to make sure to pay the rent. Well, one day, some of his friends came over and I had stupidly left the rent money sitting out. I went to the bathroom. They stole the money. They left. I lost the house that the guy had left me to keep in charge of, even though this person he just had me there to hold the place for him, and I lost it for him. In retrospect, fuck that guy, but still. So I found myself on the street again. Because I could not go back. I know that all I had to do to fix my situation was to go back. But I knew that if I went back, if I didn't keep going, that I'd never, ever escape that life. So I just kept going, and I kept failing. The next place I lived, that person ended up being a drug dealer. I was just going from bad person to bad person. I felt like it felt like I never met good. It's like it was almost like the world was. I was seeing the actual things that the witnesses were afraid, would tell you would happen if you left. And I was just meeting all these horrible people that would just take advantage of me because I was so naive and so dumb in the ways of the world that I was just a mark. And I didn't know how to take care of myself. And so eventually the drug dealer, he goes, he actually gets arrested. I lose another place to live. And it went on like this for a long time. I moved into another place. The guy was a cokehead. He spent our rent money on coke, and we lost the place. Eventually, it's the early 2000s, and now I have become an alcoholic. I started drinking when I was 21, and I didn't stop drinking until 2017. During all that time in the 90s, as things got worse and worse and worse, I just started pounding alcohol to numb my pain and my depression and my loneliness, which was, of course, not effective. And then I got addicted to it, so I couldn't stop. And I developed a tolerance. And I would need to drink more and more. And all my money was going towards beer and alcohol. And I ended up getting near to where I was going to lose my place again because I wasn't paying the bills. My mother had her husband had ended up going to jail, to federal jail, for non-payment of child support. For a minute there, it was like we kind of put our backs up against each other. But one day we just had a bad conversation that she wigged out on. I remember it was about a couch of all things. And we didn't talk for a while. And I remember her ex-husband, who had been against organized religion his whole life, he was actually kind of cool. I actually kind of liked the guy for being my third dad because he wasn't affiliated with religion. And he was very anti-religion. So I was like, oh, thank God, somebody in my life that, is kind of like knows, like, he would always talk about how he understood, like, oh my God, like that life, that way to live, that's not a way to live. He came out of jail a Jehovah's Witness. Something happened to him while he was in federal prison The guy that said he would never be part of organized religion, and he came out of Jehovah's Witness. So I'm on the verge of losing my place. My mother decides she's going to sell her place in Wisconsin, and her husband are going to move to Arizona. And I was working at a restaurant like I did those days. And she came into where I worked, and she brought my grandfather. This day is the last day I've ever seen her, and the last day I ever saw him. And the last memory I have of my grandfather was him grabbing my goatee at my job, walking up to me, grabbing me by the beard, shaking it, saying, "What is this? What is this?" Because in the witness religion, men aren't allowed to wear beards because it's disrespectful to Jesus. If you write down all the things that are disrespectful to Jesus in the witness religion, Jesus Christ, you'd barely be able to walk. So that would, and my mother went to Arizona, and I haven't seen her since. And then he left, and he died recently, and we never talked again. My just younger sister visited me. She took me back to where she lived for a weekend. And this is when I broke down and told her that if I didn't get out of where I lived, I was going to kill myself. Because I just couldn't do it anymore. I didn't know what to do. I wouldn't go back to the church and live a lie. Because at this point, I had finally realized that all of it was bullshit. That it's all just shit to keep you in control, to keep you a part of the thing that's the machine that is the witness machine, to just keep producing more witnesses. I mean, and when you look at it back, when I look at it now, it's like, Jesus Christ, I really believed in a paradise on earth where people were hanging out with lions and tigers and bears and all the other stuff. It wasn't until later that but the thing is that the morals and all the other things, like having good morals, there's nothing wrong with that. But it was all the other things that they failed to prepare you for, to keep you mentally ready, to make you feel like you're not going to live, like the world's not going to be here. What kind of life is that to live when you don't even believe that the world's going to continue? It fucked my head up so bad that I'd made so many bad choices. Because I didn't think anything mattered anymore. Well, my sister ended up taking me in, and again, this was bad. Because it was the first time that I'd kind of lied to my sister about things. Because I don't know if I was going to really kill myself. I knew it was a definite possibility that I would die from drinking myself to death. But I didn't tell her how bad, like she didn't know how bad my alcoholism had become. And so I ruined that by being weird about it. Because I was so ashamed of my drinking and hiding it in weird ways that I ended up fucking that up because I just couldn't have an honest conversation with my sister because I was afraid to of everything. So in the end, I blew it up anyway. Ended up moving into another place where I drank myself silly and lost that place because I couldn't handle anything, because I couldn't live in any world. No matter where I went, I just couldn't handle life. I didn't fit in with the rest of the world, and I didn't have another group of people to hold on to, and I couldn't admit, and alcohol had gotten so bad that I didn't know how to tell anybody, and I didn't want to tell anybody, and I was so afraid if I quit, what would happen to me? I ended up living again in just some place in the same pattern over and over again, until I finally ended up back here in 2003. 10 years, just under 10 years after I had graduated high school. And it's like, I look back on that, just under 10 years, I had destroyed so much of my life because I didn't know, because the cult I had escaped from had never prepared me for anything. They don't tell you any of this stuff. Most people don't know this about that stage of things, is when you get out, you don't know. And it was one of the things that I applauded about what Chris Stuckman had said in his video when he first said about the mental aspect of leaving the cult, how much that has an effect on you. I just didn't know it was going to last over 20 years of my life, that I was going to be struggling this long over, like, going on 30 years. That things would just still be this difficult, to still feel this disconnected to everything. And end up back in the house of my abuser. The person who I had feared my entire life. This is what it had come to. I had nowhere else to go. So I came back here because it was the only opportunity afforded me. Now, he never made me go back to church, because he didn't go to church. He still doesn't go to church. But he still believes. And so here I am still. And things have changed in this relationship. And it has gotten better. And there has been some forgiveness. And things have, we're both too old to fight the way we used to. But when I first came back, it was ugly. And I left again. I did leave. I went and I stayed with some people that I was working with, and that worked for a little while. But then the booze problem just wouldn't go away, and I wouldn't pay my bills, and I wasn't taking care of myself, and I wasn't eating, and I had no friends. I was just depressed and lonely, and I ended up sharing a room with another man, just a room. And he was a full-blown alcoholic too. And you get two alcoholics in a very small space. Eventually, it's going to look like two cats fighting in a bag. And it got so bad that I finally called an ambulance on myself. And I had them take me to a hospital for detox, which ended up taking me to a psych ward detox place, basically. Is where they take you in for counseling. You're in a whole big place full of other people detoxing. But it was like it was for mentally people that had gone mental and were suffering from alcohol abuse, drug abuse. And I was there for a week. And when I came out, they had had me on some medication. And I came back here again. Now it's 2009. And I appreciate everybody that watches this, by the way. I hope somebody gets something out of this. I didn't mean it to go on this long, but there's, I guess, apparently a lot to say that I didn't even realize how deep this all goes. But I'm getting it. I've got to get it all out. So for about a half a second, I was sober. And then I got a job where I was around alcohol and where we sold alcohol. And slowly but surely, I started sneaking it into the house. And I just went right back on going. And then my sister called, my just younger sister, and she was going through a divorce. And she needed me to come out there to help her with her kids because she worked full time, and she knew that I was the only one in her life that didn't have family to worry about. And she needed to count on her older brother to come help her. And her older brother never told her just how bad his alcohol problem was. But I saw it as a way that I didn't have to hide my drinking. I could just go out there, take care of some kids that I'm sure I love, and I could just keep on going the way I'm going. And I was like, I had laid some rules down. You know, I'm not going to just take any old job out there. I want a job like the one I have. And there were like these concessions that were made that were like, yes, of course. But then quickly she realized he's drinking a lot. He's drinking like a case of beer a night. And she's paying for it, you know, because I said, hey, I'm going to want this and that and the other. So eventually she had to tell me to leave. And I came back here again. Now it's March of 2000, maybe April of 2009, maybe May. And this is when I made this. I came back and I got a job, and I ended up switching from beer to hard booze. Because beer makes you go to the bathroom all the time, and hard liquor just gets you drunker and faster. And you don't have to, you can hide it better. You can get vodka, you can get whiskey, whatever, mix it with stuff. And that went on for a while until about 5 or 6 years later, I ended up blowing that job up because I couldn't get through a shift. I needed alcohol all the time to get through a day because otherwise I would shake uncontrollably. So I quit that job. I didn't lose it. I lost it myself. So I quit, and I just kept on drinking. And I even got the job that I'm at now, still. And I just kept on drinking. And I knew. I had a moment of it's a joke. There's a line in Fight Club about a moment of clarity, what alcoholics call clarity. Somebody died of detox. And over the last few years, between like between when I got back from my sister's in 2009 and 2017, I had toyed with detoxing myself several times. And each time it felt like I was dying. It was just horrible. And then I read about this guy who died of detoxing. And I knew that if I didn't quit and quit for good, because I was detoxing in secret, because I did all my drinking alone and I hid out alone and tried to present myself. I would pretend to eat so that it looked normal, so that I seemed normal. Maybe people knew, maybe they didn't. Maybe they didn't want to know. Maybe they didn't know how to deal with it. But my last drink was on my birthday 4 years ago. Today is my 4-year sobriety. I didn't even think about that until just now. I knew it was this day, but I just hadn't even thought about it all day. I just thought about it now. Been 4 years sober today because I didn't want to die. I knew I didn't want to die, and I knew I didn't want everything that had happened in my life because of how I was raised to kill me. I realized I didn't want to die. And that's like around the time that I got back into making my channel, because I needed something to put my back up against. And I decided to use my fears and my anxiety and my depression and try to start to do something that would fight against that. And use all the things that I knew about pop culture and movies and comics and games and try to use that to do something useful and try to build a better me by every time making a video fighting against everything that's inside me that I'm trying to beat. Try to make real friends, which I've been somewhat successful with. And they've all come from this platform, most 95% of them. And every day it's still tough. Because there's still part of me. There's still a lot of little things in my head from that church that whisper to me whenever I'm out in the world, that prevent me from succeeding sometimes, from being happy, from explaining myself. People don't understand how I see the world because I don't feel like I'm a part of it most of the time. People don't really know what it's like to be 46 years old and still feel like you're in your late teens, early 20s, and you don't know how to be an adult, and you don't know how to get past being a kid. I've made some really, really stupid mistakes that'll always stay with me. Some things hopefully can be fixed. But if you know anybody out there that's going through this, if you know anybody out there that's a witness that's struggling, if you know anybody out there that's a witness that left and seems like they need a friend, definitely reach out to them, because they might be too afraid to reach out to you because they don't know how to do. Not everybody knows how to do the same things that everybody else thinks is normal. Everything that a lot of people take for granted as normal isn't normal for us. Not all of us. Some of us have gotten over things. I feel like at least my sisters have been able to create lives for themselves, real lives that have meaning. And somehow the oldest brother, the one that everybody says is so smart and funny, is the fucked up one. But I'm still here, right? And so I know that the title of this video is How It Ruined My Life, right? I don't mean that to say that it's over. I just mean that it's meant to say that for a really long time, everything that had been taught to me caused me harm. In long-term harm that still is to some extent. And it's a fight every single day just to get through each day a lot of times. Because I still feel so often like I don't belong anywhere. And I'll never have what everybody else has. What so many people have. I know not everybody has the same thing. But I'm not giving up. And this video is never to intend to just be me whining about my life. This is a cautionary tale to other people and hopefully to help some people know that their story is, you might have some people out there that hopefully see this and go, that's my story too, and somebody else knows what it's like to not know what to do after you get out of one of these things for a really long time. And that even though it happened 30 years ago, man, not even 30, it was just really crazy. It will have effect on these people for the rest of their lives. And so hopefully those of you who don't understand this life, you'll start to maybe have a little more understanding and compassion for the people who just literally don't know how to live in this world as well as the rest of you do. So anyway, I think I'll probably be kicking myself later for some things I forgot, but I want to thank everybody that watches this. I want to thank everybody that has been here. And I know I really haven't looked at the chat or said anything about the chat, but I have been looking. I have seen you guys. You are seen. Just like you always are on this channel. It's what this is about. This is supposed to help the community, and it can help me in turn. So thank you all for watching. This is Rob here, Smirking Gun Reviews. We'll be back with more content later. Have a nice night. Bye.